Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to SBAM's Small Business Briefing. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations, and Brian is off today, so I am joined by our frequent co-host, Kelly Saunders. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement here at SBAM. And Sarah, I'll kick it back to you to welcome a new member.
Yes, we're pleased to welcome a new VIP member, the Brown Report and owner, Jason Brown. Thanks for joining. And if you're not a member, you should be. Join us, sbam.org/join. All right, so Kelly, we've actually invited one of our other colleagues, Michelle Beebe, to join us today. Michelle, say hello. You're a frequent guest contributor. Say hello and do a quick intro to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Michelle Beebe here, Chief Revenue Officer for the Small Business Association Michigan. Nice to see all of you.
So, Michelle, we invited you on today because we wanted to talk a little bit about health insurance rates, and you are our expert here. So, last week, health insurance carriers filed their proposed small group and individual market rates with diffs. And I know this is something that's top of mind for many small business owners. So, Michelle, can you talk a little bit about what these filings represent and how this process works, and maybe even a little bit about diffs?
Sure. So, first off, I think it's important to understand that these aren't approved. This is part of the process. So think of this as the starting point of regulatory review. Carriers submit their rates that they believe are accurate based on projected claims, the utilization, drug costs, provider reimbursement, and administrative costs, and then risks adjustments and actuarial assumptions, what they think the next year is going to bring. And then DIVS, which is the Department of Insurance and Finance for the state of Michigan, then reviews those filings to determine whether they are justified under the state's federal rules. So these numbers are important, but they're not the final improved renewal rates yet. DIFS has quite a process that they have to go through on their end. And in May 13th of 2026, individual rates have to be submitted, and small group rates as well. And then they have another round where they submit on May 27th. And then the carriers have up until July 13th based on what they've seen from May to July, to maybe have to make some market adjustment in index rates in there. And then they file those and they're like, okay, diffs, this is what we're really seeing for the 27 year. And then they're going to review those. It's very rare does diffs not approve what's been put in and suggested by each of the carriers. And then once the diffs is signed off, then the carriers are approved to start to build the renewal process.
So, Michelle, I don't know if you have them right in front of you, but can you tell us a little bit about the proposed increases and, ballpark what they're looking like for our small business members?
Yes. So, one of the spaces that, we have a long-standing partnership with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And there's a large range in the small group market specifically based on which carrier you're looking at. So the averages, can be anywhere between 9 to 20%, depending on the carrier. And this year's proposed small group increases at 9.6 is slightly lower than the 11% average increase from 2026. So these are just the averages. But that does not mean that it's easy for employers. I don't want you to think, oh, this looks great and everything's going to be great. This is also the base rates. So please note that your individual group census and the age of your group, where you're located, all of those things can also compound what's built into the rate. So this is, again, we're heading in the right direction. One of the things, with Blue Cross, I think that is really important to see is that their Blue Cross PPO rates are trending lower than the HMO rates, which is the first time we've seen that in a little bit. And it's really starting, you can see that the costs compared to other carriers that our friends at Blue Cross, we're starting to see their cost management come into play when their rate filings as well.
So, what do you think the biggest factors are contributing to the increases? Are we talking about utilization, prescription drugs, provider costs, or is it kind of a combination of all the things?
Well, it's easy to point fingers and often the partners do, but it's really all of those things, Sarah. It's utilization, people are using more care, and delayed care from prior years continue to work through the system. Prescription drug costs, there's one of the greatest things about AI is all of these new drug formularies that are able to come in that are very custom to each person and their makeup. Well, these are high cost specialty drugs. And while they're amazing, somebody has to pay for them. And a lot of times the actuaries don't know what's coming down the pipeline. And those may be an approved drug that is 6 months into their claims experience, and it adjusts prices accordingly. And then, of course, there's been a lot of conversation, especially in the Michigan media, about the increases or the conversations about provider contracting. And all three of those things have to work together in order for us to work to reduce costs. But all of them are built into those costs and contribute. So I can't point a finger in one place. They're all working together. And all I can say is it's nice to see some of those trends. And of course, carrier administrative costs as well come into play here. So it's really a four-pronged approach. And we can see that everybody's starting to work together, and we can see a little bit of things, firming up in the market.
All right, so I'll ask the question on behalf of our members and the small business owners watching, which is what can I do about it? So what are some of the strategies that employers can consider now as they prepare for the renewal season?
So don't wait until your renewal is issued. You know that you're particularly like most of our small business members, they renew in December and January. So your rates are coming and you know that you could expect probably at least a 10% increase coming this year. So one, start early talking about modeling with your agent. What particularly is driving your particular group's costs? Is it your plan design? Is it the makeup of your group? And then start having some tough conversations with your employees about, hey, how are they using the benefits? What is it the most important thing for them? So that when you go into the renewal season, you feel like when you're choosing a plan or maybe having to make some adjustments in that you're making the right decision on behalf of your employees. And then I think also, ask questions. It's okay to ask advisors, ask your partners out in the world, other small business owners, what are they doing to mitigate these costs? And then really have some conversation about employee contribution as well. So all of those things come into place, and I think being prepared and asking the smart questions and do it early is the best approach.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Any final words of wisdom or advice to those tuning in?
Other than we're here, SBAM has a dedicated employee benefits team. We've got several on staff that are licensed agents as well. And if you don't have an agent or you need an agent, we have a strong distribution channel of insurance agents that are specialists in the small business field. And if you're stuck and you don't know what to do, or you want to talk through some strategy, and what are other business owners doing, give us a call. We're here to help support and give you any kind of feedback. And as you know, we're still out there fighting for some changes legislatively regarding MEWAL laws and association health plans. So we're always here. And if you're curious about what SBM's doing, give us a call. We want to hear from you.
All right, well, thanks, Michelle, for breaking it down for us today. We appreciate you and your team.
Thanks for having us.
All right, we are going to move on with the rest of the agenda. So, Kelly, there's been quite a bit of action on Election Watch 2026 items. So, and kind of a lot of things that have happened even since Friday. So, let's start with an update on the US Senate race on the Democratic side.
Yeah, there's not a lack of things to talk about in this space. So for today's programming, we're really going to be focusing in on that big time. So yes, the US Senate race. I'm sure that if you were around some of our bigger cities over the weekend, you saw a lot of opportunity for rallies specifically in this race. Abdul El Sayed had some big names with him over the weekend. Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were all stumping for him. The Lansing Center, specifically yesterday, was at capacity. 1,600 people came out to hear this group of folks. And so, what we see almost 2 weeks out is a lot of people rallying for the cause and making sure that they are heard prior to people going to the ballot box. But in some instances, there are, obviously absentee ballots in people's hands. There's early voting now. And so there's a lot of noise. Now, I will say there's been obviously a lot of star power behind Abdul El Sayed. Congresswoman Haley Stevens really seems to be drowning that out. She's just kind of marching to the beat of her own drum, staying true to her campaign message. She's also been out across the state connecting with voters. And so I would say where Abdul is trying to connect with a younger crowd, getting Gen Z excited to get out and vote. We know sometimes in the past that's worked, in other cases it has not. Haley Stevens has really stayed true to kind of the normal, if you will, ground game. Uh, she's been very successful with women who vote throughout Michigan. We know that's a very important voting block to get behind you, and so it's really going to be interesting to see how this race shakes out. It's very tight. When we saw polling come out from one of the major news publications in Southeast Michigan, it had Congresswoman Stevens up by 7 points. But then there's a bunch of internal polling that's being released that shows that it's tighter. And so, in a day and age where can we trust polling, can we not? Who knows? We don't know who's truly going to show up to vote in this primary. And so, she's enjoyed that bump. He's enjoying, obviously, the star power of it, if you will, being covered by every news media outlet as he pulls in people from out of state. And so this is a hot race. This is going to be incredibly important to pay attention to. And who comes out of it? Mike Rogers has been sitting on the side waiting for who his opponent is. And again, this U.S. Senate seat is going to be one to watch, just like it has been in the past, as it does make a difference for who will control the Senate in D.C. in the year to come. But you will be hearing more over the next 2 weeks, not only over the airwaves, but we will keep you up to date as well. But lots of movement in this race over the weekend.
All right, now let's move on to the gubernatorial race and the Republican side of the ticket.
Yes, Friday was a busy day. So, former Attorney General Mike Cox did drop out of the race for governor. And a couple things to say about that. He was very classy in his statement, said that they did not see a path. He immediately endorsed Congressman John James for the Republican ticket, kind of giving a nod to the president that this is what the president wanted. And so, Mike Cox is a professional. He's held office before. He knows what it takes. And so instead of trying to trudge it out the rest of the way, it was time to step back and offer that support. He did pledge that support. I will say Perry Johnson, who's still in the race for the Republican side, invited Cox supporters to join his ticket and support him, called him a good man, and that they shared similar messages, and that those folks that were supporting Cox should join their ticket. So, in no surprise to anyone, Perry Johnson is not looking to get out of this race. It will be a true fight at the ballot box for who Republicans will pick between John James and Perry Johnson when it comes to who, will face the Democratic opponent in November. And so we've seen a lot of obviously commercials across our TVs, across our screens between these two candidates. They have been not shy about sharing barbs against each other on both sides. And so this really becomes a two-man race now with Mike Cox stepping out on that Republican side for governor. Will it be Congressman James or Perry Johnson? And we will know in 2 weeks.
All right, let's talk about the Democrat side. And now, Kelly, is Benson still kind of clearing her path forward and leading the way?
Yeah, I mean, before I start this conversation, I'll say, Sheriff Swanson, who's out of Genesee County, if you've had the opportunity to meet Sheriff Swanson, he has enough energy really to power the whole state of Michigan. He's got a great attitude. He never seems to have a lack of energy. He has been traveling all around the state. If you follow him via social media, pretty heavy social media presence. He goes to every corner. He loves talking with people. So he's got the energy to be governor. Nobody's even saying that that's not the case. However, Secretary Benson, from recent polling, really does have a hold on this primary. I think the last poll that was published last week had her up 60 points in this race. There was a comment made by a political pundit, that they think that the sheriff's radar gun is off by 60 miles per hour, which is kind of funny, but a little quippy. But I don't see the sheriff necessarily bowing out ahead of the election in 2 weeks, but we'll see. He really does seem to obviously believe in his message. He loves connecting with people across Michigan, but the writing on the wall does say that Secretary Benson looks to be able to come out of this primary without a problem. However, we will know shortly. But polling is all leading to that result at the end of the day, if the voters so choose.
All right, well, thanks for those updates, Kelly. We're going to stay here in Election Watch 26, but we're going to talk about an endorsement that Senator Slotkin made last week in her former congressional district. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we haven't talked a ton about congressional races lately because the statewide ticket has been so fascinating. But the reason why this is notable is because, for the most part, Senator Slotkin has really stayed out of her former seat that she held prior to running for the U.S. Senate, the 7th congressional seat. Now, when she vacated that office, this congressional seat is one of the top watched in the entire country. It covers much of the Lansing region, Livingston, and part of Oakland, and it's got a really interesting demographic makeup. It's pretty split. And so when she left that seat, it did flip from Democrat to Republican. Congressman Tom Barrett currently holds that seat. Now, there's been quite a race on the Democratic side in this congressional seat with three candidates really kind of vying for that position. Those three are Matt Mazdam, who is a former Navy SEAL, Bridget Brink, a former ambassador to Ukraine, and then also William Lawrence, who's a progressive activist. So William Lawrence was with Abdul El Sayed and Senator Sanders and AOC over the weekend, kind of on that ticket. Bridget Brink has really been racking up or tallying up the establishment endorsements, if you will. And Matt's campaign has been fairly quiet. Well, U.S. Senator Slotkin endorsed Matt Mazdam this past week. And so people are saying, why is she deciding to get involved in this race, 2.5 weeks out? Well, there's some similarities. There's a couple people who worked on her campaign that will now work on his. They share similar connections in national security. She worked in national security before running for office. And so some would say, political capital, why are you doing this when it kind of seems to be a race now between Lawrence and Brink? Well, she may say that this is more in line with who I am and this person is, and so therefore I'm going to back them. It'll time will tell to see if that pays off. Now, she's a well-liked person in office, and that's kind of hard to come by when it comes to people serving in any form of government. But she does carry a lot of weight in her former congressional seat, and so if she clearly feels that this is the right candidate to support, it's just interesting timing wise. And so, in a crowded field of these three people, who comes out on top? And once that is decided between these three, that whoever's coming up against Congressman Barrett, that is going to be one of the most watched races in the entire country, along with our U.S. Senate race. And so it's interesting she decided to weigh in. We'll see who comes out of it. And then this is one of the races that we will be following closely leading into November, not only is the SBM main office here, but we work with them, this office, no matter who's represented it, Slotkin, Barrett, because we have a lot of needs in DC too, and that's kind of like our who represents us, obviously, as an organization here. So just a fascinating piece of information that Senator Slotkin has weighed in, and we'll see what happens because it's definitely made people look over the last half week to say, okay, what do we do with this race now?
All right, well, thanks for that intel, Kelly, especially those of us in that 7th congressional district. All right, so there's another new trend that we've been seeing, which is candidates filing as independents. And those seeking ballot access in the independent category had to file signatures by 4 p.m. last Friday. So who entered the race there?
Yeah, a little bit of an interesting story that 9 candidates actually filed to run as independents in Michigan before the end of the time on Friday that you said hit. And obviously, we saw, an unusual entry into the governor's race with former mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, in the gubernatorial. Now, he had exited back in May, saying that he didn't have a path. But the reason we bring this up is because this is kind of speaking to the point that there are people who don't really necessarily feel at home in the Republican or the Democratic Party at this moment. And so, 9 candidates after you have to get all these signatures in order to make the ballot, it's no small feat. Like you really have to work hard at it to access it. And so, is this telling that independents can get over the finish line when it comes to these races at the end of the day? One of the most notable ones is that a former Democratic lawmaker who held a seat in the Michigan House, Sarah Cambenzi, did file her signatures to run for an independent in the Senate seat up there. Very contested Republican primary. But it's the Senator Ed McBroom holds it currently. And so he'll be vacating because he's term limited at the end of the year. She was a very well-liked Democratic lawmaker and decided to step away from the House and now has decided to re-enter and run for Senate as an independent. And so it will be really telling to see how that race shakes out and how her impact in that race comes out because she's not running as a Republican or a Democrat. She's now an independent, but a very well-known commodity up there in that seat. And so just a notation on that specific race as an example of people not feeling at home within a party and how do independents start to make headway in Michigan, or do they? And we're going to find out in this upcoming election. And so nine candidates is quite a few. And are there more to follow in future elections? We're going to have to wait and see.
All right, and really Friday was a big day apparently in the election area. So the Bureau of Elections made a big decision on a ballot initiative that we're tracking here at SBAM. So Kelly, what is that initiative and what are the next steps?
Well, we know that these ballot proposals are like our favorite thing these days, and I say that sarcastically. So, there is a ballot proposal right now called Michiganders for Money Out of Politics. And the Michigan Elections Bureau on Friday recommended certification of this ballot initiative. And if passed, it essentially, this sounds all good, significantly restricts political spending by regulated utilities and large government contractors. So let's just talk about a little bit how this happens. So essentially, the Bureau of Elections staff reviews a sample of the signatures that are submitted, and you need a minimum of like 362,000. So people usually try to submit double that because what they have to do is they have to take a sample and they have to put it up against the voter file. So like, is this person still alive? Do they still live here? Are there duplicate signatures because somebody forgot that they signed it twice? But the problem is, and many people don't understand, for all the signatures that are turned in, not every signature is actually checked. They take a sample of 1,000 signatures from the mass amounts that are turned in, and then they base that sample and apply it to all the signatures that were turned in. It's not really a great process. So, for this specific ballot proposal, the staff review found that this specific proposal that turned in 368,762 valid signatures. So that's like very minimum. Like I said, most people turn in 5 to 600,000 because of the duplicates. 11,804 more that were needed, obviously. Um, the Bureau used that 1,000 signatures, and then essentially what happened is that they tossed out 201 in an initial analysis and another 142 following a challenge by a group that is opposing it. And so it passes with just a narrow margin out of the Bureau of Elections, essentially. So this is why this matters. This is essentially like a way to basically get money out of the system because people are not big fans of DTE Energy, Consumers Energy, and other regulated utilities. The problem with this ballot proposal is that it is written in a way, and we've come across this with other ballot initiatives, that's not exactly truthful. And so the questions we have is that does it just stop at utilities and people being mad at utilities? We don't know that because of the way it's written. The questions we have is does it impose a new governmental restriction on free speech? You know that you can't obviously restrict people from free speech. So if you work for an utility or if you're even married to someone who works for a utility, you technically could not give money to candidates in this proposal, but it sounds flowery and great. So we have questions. Who does this really apply to? Does it apply restrictions to a broad range of different types of providers on electricity and natural gas? Does it restrict freedom of association rights like us? Does this include us? It doesn't necessarily say in the verbiage. Is it subject to a much broader range of people and organizations, not just electrical and gas utilities like we just talked about? And then also, does it regulate communications like the way that we can communicate via the internet? There are so many things that are so broad in the proposal that it doesn't clearly state. And so then when it's left to its own devices, are you really restricting people from engaging in the political process? So the next step is for it to go to the Board of Canvassers meeting, which is this Friday at 10 o'clock here in Lansing. And the Board of Canvassers will review the language to put on the ballot that would be presented to voters to truly explain what the ballot proposal is. So we'll be in attendance there on Friday to see how this all shakes out, but we really want some legal questions asked before this would ever move forward. And so it's a complicated ballot measure. It sounds good in nature because people are really mad at the utilities right now, but it's also not based in total truth or well thought out verbiage. So, um, another fun thing for us to handle here.
Well, it sounds like we'll have an update on how that Board of Canvassers meeting goes at next week's briefing.
Yes.
Stay tuned for that.
Yes.
All right, I think that's all we have for Election Watch today, but there was a big announcement that came out of Governor Whitmer's office also Friday pertaining to some staff updates. So Kelly, who moved on and what's changed?
Yeah, it's not unusual towards the end of gubernatorial administrations to see department directors move on. Obviously, we know a lot of these positions are appointed with every governor, a staff or an administration, as far as like who runs the Department of Health and Human Services or Civil Rights. Those things often transition over. And so the governor's chief of staff, Joanne Hulls, will be moving on into a senior advisor role and will step back from that chief of staff role. Joanne has been with the governor the entire time. She also worked for Governor Granholm when Governor Granholm served. And so it was kind of a shock. Everybody kind of thought that Joanne would go to the very end. But she's making way for other people and other promotions in the governor's administration. And so we saw not only Joanne move on, but a host of other people that would gained promotions. And Zach Pohl will be the new chief of staff starting August 1st for Governor Whitmer. He has been a part of her administration the entire time, I believe, as well. And so a lot of people were shocked by it, like, what does this mean? It's nothing more than what normally happens towards the end of these administrations. And so it was like I said, a shock to many, but things are going to start to change around here, and there'll be more announcements as we reach the end of the year. But lots of opportunity for promotions and transitions of governor to governor. This staff that does choose to stay, they have a lot that they have to do towards the end here to make sure that this administration ends well and the new one comes in prepared to start on day one. So yeah, Friday was an incredibly busy day, and we hope you feel up to date now on the things that have happened.
All right. And before we say goodbye today, I do want to remind everybody that we have a couple of owner to owner gatherings coming up. We will be in the Great Lakes Bay region in Bay City this week, Thursday. And then next week, Tuesday, we will be in the Wayne region in Dearborn. So if you're going to be in those areas or you live in those areas, we would really love to connect with you in person. You can visit sbam.org/events to sign up. All right, Kelly, thanks for joining me today. And thanks to Michelle as well. We hope you have a great week. We will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Have a great week, everybody.